Hello, everyone, and welcome to Booming Encore's Learning Bites. My name is Susan Williams, and I'm the founder of Booming Encore. Where we decide to live while we age can be a critical and sometimes a challenging decision, and no one knows this better than my guest today, Dr. Stephen Golant. Dr. Golant is a professor at the University of Florida and is recognized and sought out for his research on the housing, mobility, transportation, and long-term care needs of older people. Along with being a professor, Dr. Golant is also the author of the book, Aging in the Right Place. He joins me today to share some of his knowledge and research, specifically on the topic of aging in place. Welcome, Dr. Golant.
Thank you.
So, Dr. Golant, aging in place is a relatively new term to a lot of people. What does it actually mean?
So there's some disagreement, but most experts that I appreciate simply refer to aging in place as the likelihood that older people will stay put in their residences, in their homes, in their neighborhoods, in their communities that they have lived in most of their past lives. Now, not everyone agrees. There's a definition by one of our federal agencies in the United States that argue that aging in place implies that is a successful effort, that people who are aging in place are those who are maintaining their independence and their health and their activity and their comfort. We hope for that, but the reason that many experts shy away from that definition is that it implies that aging in place, staying put, is always a successful effort. And what we know is that's not true. There's some older people who can remain in their current homes. They make adjustments, they make home modifications, they secure transportation when they are able to, if they lose the ability to drive, they get help from their family members, and they are able to maintain their independence. But as we know, there's some older persons who simply have challenges. They may not have that loving daughter to take care of them if they have health care declines, and they don't have enough financial wherewithal to make home modifications or to bring in all these smart home technologies that would help them age in place. So it can be a mixed bag. So we simply, most experts that I appreciate, define aging in place simply as staying put in your own home as long as possible. It may yield good, but it may yield also bad outcomes.
Are estimated to want to stay in their own home or age in place?
So that turns out to be a very complicated question, Susan. And let me just give you just a couple of scenarios to show you why it's difficult. So imagine you start following people who turn 50, turn age 50. So a certain group of those age 50-year-olds will, in their 50s and early 60s, will make residential moves, often for lifestyle considerations. They want a nicer climate, or they want to move closer to their grandchildren. So that's one group, and it's a minority group. Then there's another minority group who we follow them through their 50s. They'll stay put in their homes, and only in their late 70s and 80s will they make a residential change, often maybe to a family home in order to get support, or to some kind of senior care residence to get more formal support. That's also a minority. Then there's yet one other minority, and there's three minority groups. First, the third minority, and we know some of these people, they seem to relish moving many times throughout their old age. They move often in their 50s, they move in their 60s, they move in their 70s. They have no reluctance to change residences. This is also minority. And finally, there's the majority of older people who, when we follow them through their 50s and older, they stay put right until the end of their lives in their current place of residence. So it's a more complicated measure in terms of deciding what number, but it's very clear that the majority of older persons will stay put in their current residences if you follow them from their age 50s going forward through the rest of their lives.
Now, what are some of the benefits of actually doing that?
So again, and this is in many ways the advice I always give older people when I'm is I say beware of the experts, because experts want to tell you what livable communities are really about, and they want to tell you what the best place to live is about. They want to tell you where you should, where the best community to retire is. And I say, be very careful about listening to these guys and women, and because they're not you. And people have idiosyncratic needs and wants, and they have personal goals, and they have to listen to themselves. They have to understand what has made them happy throughout most of their lives. They have to try to inform themselves as to what's going to happen as they get older, and this is often a very difficult to do. One of the most difficult pieces of advice you give anybody in late life, and to say is, can you envision what if scenarios? What if your money runs out? What if your health goes downhill? What if your spouse unfortunately dies? How will you cope with that? And how will it affect whether or not you think where you live is now suitable, even as it once was suitable before those events took place? And unfortunately, it's very hard for ordinary people and experts and academics alike to make these kinds of what-if scenario calculations.
Sure. Well, it sounds like it's very much a personal situation, and that you have to really do a deep dive analysis of where you are and where you think you may be, and then what are the different options that are going to best suit you. Is that correct?
That's correct. And what's making it more complicated is our society is changing even as we're making these decisions. So, for example, once upon a time, if you lost your license to drive a car, it would certainly make certain neighborhoods rather difficult to remain in, because getting to just everyday places would be hard. But now we have ride-sharing services such as Uber and Lyft that would certainly blunt some of the downsides of losing your license in terms of getting around. Loneliness is of course a major problem among older people, and of course we've seen the magnification of the loneliness problem during this COVID pandemic. But although it's not a perfect substitute, we have, of course, the Zoom and FaceTime and Skype, and so that at the very least we can see, not just talk to, but we can see our loved ones through these devices. It's not perfect, but it certainly, once again, blunts some of the negative impact of living alone in your house or apartment and feeling that sense of loneliness. So if you wanted to get a bank account settled, if you want to get your groceries, if you wanted to get any kind of a good that would make you happy, you had to get in your car or get in a bus and ride to a destination. That also is changing rapidly with the advent of e-commerce, the Amazons of the world. So many of those goods that we normally would have to run outside to get can be delivered to our homes. But once again, this goes to the point of that in terms of helping older people adapt to old age, the solutions today are often different than the solutions of yesterday. My perspective is to make an age-friendly community often requires that it has good quality internet, and that we give older people the opportunity to learn how to access the internet and online activities in order to achieve many of their goods and services.
Interesting you mentioned that, because I actually had been to a meeting where they were talking with some older people and living on their own, and they were saying that they felt the pressure to actually go online, and yet the bank or the grocery stores were where they actually had the opportunity to connect with people. So on one hand, it offers a solution, but on the other hand, it can potentially take away from something else, which may have been, core to that person as well. So you're right. It's so personal in that you really have to assess where you are, what your living conditions are, what you need to do in order to stay safely in your house. What are the things that are important to you, such as, like you said, your social interconnections, your ability to get what you need delivered, and then the support that you need from a healthcare perspective. I mean, there's so many moving parts in this. It's not just a simple answer, is it?
It's never a simple answer, and that's why the decision to move or not to move is not one to be taken lightly. By the way, we have horror stories of older people who picked themselves up and moved across the country thinking that this was their nirvana. And when they got there, they realized, no, this is not going to work. And they went ahead and moved back to their original residence. So we want to avoid that kind of horror story.
Absolutely. Now, what I find interesting was you've done some recent research, which is quite eye-opening or illuminating on how people are not, their desire to actually move later in life decreases over time, which in actual fact, you would think because they might need support, that would actually be a motivator. Do you want to just share a little bit about what you've learned?
Sure. So it's an interesting perspective that hasn't really been focused on by most researchers. It's a very simple idea that as we get chronologically older, and as we were confronted with declines in our ability to do certain things, and maybe our health is not so great, we become increasingly aware of the fact that we ain't going to live forever. The academic term is distance to death perception, but very simply the idea of saying, we'd like to be immortal, but unfortunately it's not going to be the case. But as soon as you have that sort of that in the back of your mind, and we're not talking about being preoccupied or obsessed by this, and as soon as we have in the back of our mind the idea that, we're not going to live forever, it can radically change how we look at our lives and what we consider most important in our lives. And so one of the interpretations of the current theories out there is that rather than focusing on long-term outcomes and long-term goals and activities that we're going to achieve maybe 5 or 10 years out, we tend to be more present-oriented. We tend to focus on how can we maximize our enjoyment in the here and now? How can we get the most pleasure, the most rewards in what we do in our lives, because we're not sure how long we're going to live, and so we want to maximize our current enjoyment, our current comfort. And how that relates to the residential decision is that we know, for example, that moving is hard work. It's not particularly remarkable. We know we have to sell the house, we have to deal with a realtor, but more important, we have to, all our customary activities that we've had and that we take for granted. We know where the grocery stores are that are most reliable and who our doctors are most reliable. And we have often have a reliable group of friends who we can, touch base with when we need to for friendship as well as emotional support. When the prospect of picking up stakes and moving elsewhere and breaking those ties, breaking those very important sources of emotional comfort and practical advantages becomes a little less attractive. Because let's face it, even if we move in a place that we think is our new nirvana, it's going to take time to adjust to a new place. We have to find new friends. We have to, moreover, we have to, making a friend, a close friend, of course, is very difficult at any time, but certainly in older age, finding that person you can trust and who, respects who you are and who accepts you for who you are is difficult. Finding, the most convenient grocery stores or doctors and services to go to is yes, it obviously can be done, but it takes time. And there's the rub. It takes time. And so the idea of investing a considerable amount of time and energy and emotion in making that residential move becomes less attractive when you have in the back of your mind of saying, do I really want to spend a considerable amount of the rest of my life adjusting and adapting to a new place of residence? And so in that sense, it becomes less motivating to move.
And it does make so much sense, because you think about how much time and energy it takes to even make that decision, then to actually go through with it, then to actually, like you said, get yourself into the space, feeling comfortable with your surroundings and the people that are there. I mean, that could be a very lengthy process. And as you said, the closer you get to I hate to use the word, the end line, it means that's less time for you to do other things that you might want to do. So it does make sense, but it's also surprising in that people probably need more support then too. So, moving possibly to a community that offers that cared support, you would think would be a motivator. So it sounds like it's quite a challenging time. So what would you recommend? Is it better to think about this before you get towards the end and start making your decisions? Or is this something that, just be aware of and deal with it as it comes?
I think that it's very hard to make future decisions. Some people are better at it than others. So for example, we have a group of people who will move into what we refer to as a life care community or a continuing care retirement community, where you have all levels of support are there. So you move into the place when you're relatively independent, and then when you have some decline, they can move you to an assisted living. And then if really everything goes downhill, you can move into a nursing home, and it's all there for you. There's some people who are willing to, put up the bucks, and it's not cheap, to have that full continuum of care available to them, just in the event that they need it. And there's other persons who, who wait till they actually have a crisis before they move. And I can't, I think I'm probably in that latter camp as an individual, is that I'll probably wait until I have the crisis before I'll make a major move. However, what's important is to have a checklist or some background information to say, well, in the event that crisis occurs, let me think a little bit now about the things I might do. You don't have to sign anything on the dotted line. You don't have to contact your mover, but have in the back of your mind some of the options that are out there, so that in the event some kind of crisis event, a spouse dies, your health goes downhill, then at least you are not thinking about the alternatives newly, but rather that you've thought about those alternatives a little bit, kept your eyes on the ball a little bit to see what's out there. You don't have to be preoccupied by it, but it's nice to have just a little bit of background information when that crisis does occur and you feel you have to move.
Some excellent advice. It's so true, because the better we plan, the easier it will be also for the people that are trying to support us, knowing what we would want to do. So it's similar to almost like your estate planning, but it's planning for where you want to age as you live, and figuring out what the best solutions may be, whether you need them right now or in the future. So some very good advice. Thank you very much. So that ends our session to today. I'd like to thank Dr. Golant for this experience and knowledge that he's sharing with us. And I hope that everybody finds this information valuable and helps you live your best booming encore. Bye for now, everyone.